Isn't it strange how so many of us as neurodivergents believe that we can protect ourselves by attacking ourselves before anybody else can? We beat the external critic to the punch by engaging our internal critic and catching ourselves and calling ourselves out and naming the shame, or naming the fault that then leads to the shame, as a way of inoculating ourselves against the shame that could be induced, the rejection sensitivity that could be triggered by somebody pointing out a flaw, criticizing us, judging us, calling us out. And it's a bit of a fallacy to believe that that actually works. Maybe early on in life, when you're trapped in schools that aren't accommodating, around peers who are bullies, that might be a way of keeping you small and safe, but also stunted and stuck if you remain using that defense mechanism as an adult and life changes and you're not necessarily stuck in the same way you were as a child, or as helpless as you were as a child. As an adult, hopefully you have a lot more agency in your life to make certain choices that you couldn't, and to choose certain environments that you might not have been able to. And through that choice, hopefully construct a kinder, more embracing and accepting environment, and find people who are validating and accepting of your neurotype, your differences, your inherent qualities that you were picked on once upon a time when you're growing up. However, having suffered for such a long time that internal critic, that tyrannical inner critic, which is a symptom of complex trauma, comes to occupy the center stage of your mind and believes it is running the show. And it often bypasses logic. You're not even consciously thinking about it. It just kicks in automatically. It's a reflexive, knee-jerk response, a preemptive response as it sees itself to be. And often how it comes out is that people see you saying self-critical things, or shrinking, or wincing, or withdrawing, or avoiding, and it's not apparent what's going on. You might have also preemptively perceived an attack that was coming that never would have, and so you start jumping at shadows and perceiving threats in relationships and people that maybe it's not necessarily warranted, and it creates this disconnect with other people. And yet you feel like you still have to do this, because if you don't, you'll be in danger. And it becomes second nature, it becomes rote, and you don't know how to operate without self-criticizing. You don't want to stop doing it because it's the thing that's kept you safe. And there's a series of logical arguments, deductions that you've made and arrived at, and that have become concretized, crystallized, solidified to the point that letting go of it seems impossible. It seems written into the code of your being, of the way that you operate and shop in the world. The good news is, this string of logic is often very distorted. There's some illogical arguments that are made that don't necessarily correspond to reality, conclusions that you've arrived at through maybe some bad data, through selective selection of data, like you've gone and looked at all the evidence to substantiate the argument that you should self-criticize when there might be arguments to the counter. And this in itself, this critic, that's the result of this logic, sees its purpose is to continue and persevere and keep you alive. So it fights tooth and nail to keep operating and running the show. And so when you start introducing other perceptions, when you start naming the cognitive distortions that have fueled this critic and the behavior, the self-criticism that you've engaged in, it might want to resist that. It might be dismissive. It might want to shoot you down and wear you out to the point that you return to being subservient to it. It might mock and make fun of and be dismissive of self-compassion or any kind of self-care, and see it as an unnecessary frippery, a self-indulgent behavior. And that's it's doing its job as it perceives it to be. What we can do through self-work, through therapy, is learn to engage in a dialogue with that critic and understand that it is one in an array of internal voices that you can take into consideration and maybe leverage as you see as suitable. It depends on you and your own individual judgment, unclouding that judgment, disentangling all the voices of these conflicting parts, and learning to honor and tune in to your own intuition. And that can be really hard if you've been leaning really hard into this critic and the inherent kind of pattern of self-criticism that's become second nature to you. It seems impossible to find your intuition, to actually know what you feel and think and what you want, because you're too hell-bent on following the pattern, even if the pattern is dysfunctional. I would love to hear from you. What are your experiences around self-criticism, around beating your external critics to the punch by punching yourself first and noting all your failures and shaming yourself and humiliating yourself, self-flagellating yourself internally. What have been your experiences around this? Have you found it really hard to let go of this habit? And if you've managed to kind of shift the needle a little bit and get unstuck and maybe introduce some self-care, some self-compassion, some alternate voices or perspectives, what's that been like for you? Has it been a relief? Has it felt like, a monumental, even just a micro shift in the way that you operate? And do you believe it's possible to let go of this critic and to have a life where you're not constantly self-flagellating and attacking yourself every second of the day for every little thing, preemptively perceiving a failure and anticipating and projecting onto other people that they're going to be angry at you and going to lash out at you if you don't jump quickly to name it and address it, or again, self-criticize as a way of being defensive or preemptively anticipating an attack? I would love to hear about your experiences.